We are live.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Atkin, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yes, you
There
are.
you go.
Malcolm
How's that?
Atkin. Yeah, that was terrific. Malcolm Atkin, for our audience,
Oh,
is
did
an
it?
electronics wizard. He's helped some of the most influential producers and players in music history shape the places where they ply their craft. From Sir George Martin to Mark Ronson, Malcolm has built, restored, revamped, and souped up consoles, instruments, and outboard gear for the best of them, and even helped design some of the studios where the world's most iconic records were committed to tape. Joining me as co-host, the Wesinator, our homeboy Wes. Maybe Wes, you've outdone yourself this time. Malcolm, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, glad to be here. What should we
So
talk
you have
about then?
a long and illustrious career, and we want to recap some of it, and we want to introduce our listeners to you, because the thing is, you've worked on the gear that has made the records that we all know and love. And,
indeed, yeah.
And you've played behind the scenes the whole time. So where do we begin? Where did your fascination with electronics start?
With electronics, gosh, I think my parents kind of spotted it when I took their alarm clock apart when I was about 7 years old. How do we deal with this kid? You know?
Yeah. What do we do with them? So what did they do with you?
They just let me do anything, really. If you know what I mean. As long as it wasn't too illegal. But no. No, they just encouraged me wherever I could go, you know. And so I had all sorts of interests, still do. You know, not only in the music biz, but all sorts of things, you know. As long as it's something new and interesting, I'm there.
Yeah.
And even,
was there
even after all these years, I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
My accountant told me, don't ever retire. So
I'm sure accountants everywhere are saying those words to a lot of people, especially in the music business.
Well, I think he only wants the paycheck, really. But there we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's one reason.
So,
is there, as you got started though, where would you say you really sort of solidified your position? What's the first thing that you really worked on where you thought, I can make a career out of this?
Well, I tell you what it was. All through school, and I had quite a checkered school career, I was in a band, weren't we all, you know?
Yeah.
But the two guys I was in the band with were serious musicians, and both went on to have long careers in the music business. Still doing it out there. But I kind of realised I wasn't in their league, do you know what I mean? I was the bass player. And so...
Yeah,
that's a bit unfair on bass players.
Come on, you know what you call a guy who hangs around with musicians? The drummer.
Yeah, the drummer. Yeah, well, there we go. Less said about the drummer, the better. But there we are.
All right, but let's say the bass player is the second in line for getting the most chicks.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's like viola players and banjo players, isn't it? Yeah.
So as the bass player in this band, let's keep the story rolling, because these guys were serious. You were hanging in there.
I was kind of hanging in there, and I thought I need a backup plan here. You know, I was always into electronics, so I did a degree in electronics, and so I was sort of hanging around with all these people and thinking, I am not like these people, you know. So I came out of like the course and sort of thought, well, how do I marry together music and electronics? I know, I'll go and work in a studio. And in those days, people actually advertised for jobs, you know. So I actually answered an ad and got a job at a studio in the West End of London, Pi Studios. It's long gone. And I had 18 months of recording Max Bygraves and Des O'Connor and people like that. These are like music hall artists. They're not cool rock and roll artists at all. But we did have one thing. We had the Pi Mobile. It was the only mobile recording unit in London at the time.
Okay.
And they were selling it. They were selling it to Richard Branson's lot. And they had one last gig with it. So they asked me, this young tech, to go along and set it all up. So off I went. I had a chap called Rupert Hine. He passed away quite recently. But anyway, I ended up at the farmyard doing a band called Quantum Jump. And suddenly it was like, this is the rock and roll business I signed up for.
I see.
Right? And had couple of wonderful months out at this farmyard out in Buckinghamshire. And at the end of it, and I'd met most of the people from Air Studios by that point. They'd all been out to the farm and messing around and what have you. And the next thing I know, I get a call, and I was offered a job there.
All right.
As a greenhorn tech, if you like.
A greenhorn tech.
Well, whatever, green, wet behind the ears, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, I ended up being at Air for 25 years.
Air Studios, for our listeners, is what was a place where George Martin recorded, and where so many records that we know and love were recorded. And there were 3 of them, were there not?
It's in its 3rd iteration. Well, it's second home. Yes, in London. Okay. The original one at Oxford Circus, where I worked, was only a lease, so we had to leave.
I see. 80s. That's how that happened.
Yeah.
And then what in the 80s? So I believe when you left in the 80s, does that mean you went from there to Montserrat, or was there at any point 2 locations?
No. Montserrat was a side issue, actually. At the end of the 70s, George had always wanted to build a studio in some sort of exotic location. In fact, his first idea was to build it on a boat. But I think that the sheer logistics of trying to do that thwarted that plan. Yeah. And he just came back one day from, I think he'd been on an airplane in Canada or somewhere, and he'd seen a brochure about Montserrat on the airplane, in the Airplane magazine. So he flew down there and came back to London and said, "I've just bought a 36-acre plot, and we're going to build a studio there."
Terrific.
And the rest of the staff are all looking at each other, going, "Oh, how do we deal with this?"
Who's moving? Yeah, right. Which one of us is going out there?
Yeah, so I ended up going out there for a year building it.
You built Air Studios Montserrat.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of the logistics.
I didn't build it on my own. Put it that way. No.
I hear you. It's always a team effort for something that size.
It's always a serious team effort. Yeah,
but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump ahead first and ask, how did you meet Wes?
Well, that is interesting. I'm not sure. No, I do know. One of my other roles was I ended up being chairman of APRS. I don't know whether your listeners might have heard of APRS, the Association of Professional Recording Services. And I was the chair, and it was basically, we were the trade association. We ran we looked after all the studios in London, or right across the UK. Wes came on as one of our directors. When was that? About 15 years ago.
So something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of came to an end when George passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. So we closed down the association, and it's basically looked after by the MPG, the Music Producers Group.
But by then you had forged a friendship.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
How did that get on?
I don't know.
What makes a guy want to be friends with Wes?
I don't know. He might have a different take on it, really.
Yeah. How'd that go?
I'm the guy who likes and uses all the gear that Malcolm fixes, and Malcolm's got all these amazing stories about things that are it's the recording history that I love. So it's like immediate hookup over a pint.
Yeah. It sounds like a good way to forge and solidify a friendship.
Yeah,
indeed.
So have you I'm going to ask Wes. Wes, you are the guy who uses, and we know that Malcolm means breaks, the gear that Malcolm is tasked to fix, maintain, and make sound better in some cases. So tell us a juicy story about something that you screwed up royally, and Malcolm came in and saved you, because I know that's happened. Well, and if it hasn't happened, you're not trying hard enough.
That is true. No, I mean, there's been I think the first thing you fixed was one of my tape machines, wasn't it? My dad gave me.
Your dad had about a whole shed full of old Revox.
Well, he still has, yeah.
Has he? Oh gosh.
Yeah, there's about 3 here at the moment. But
oh no, don't.
I think your accountant's going to be glad to hear that, Malcolm.
You fixed a couple of microphones and a couple of tape echoes.
He's always bringing me stuff to have a look at. He usually brings me stuff that's difficult to fix, to be honest with you. So there you go. But the funny thing is,
so that's where Wes gets it. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, I was just going to say that actually, around about 1985, I became the manager. Right, so I basically was managing people for 20, 30 years. So I kind of stepped back from being, if you like, a true tech, as it were. So I kind of missed out on a big chunk of digital, if you like.
Wow.
So when I came, I always say to my clients now, I don't do digital.
The landscape had some changes in it by the time you came back.
Oh, absolutely. There's plenty of kids out there that can do the digits, but funnily enough, us old boys who actually can, kick something in.
You know what whale fat smells like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I call it percussive maintenance.
Ah, I see.
Which means giving it a good.
So you
kick.
bang on it. Yeah, right. So okay, when you are there managing people, you're managing teams that keep studios running, and those studios at the time, you said that happened in 1985. So you ran the tech team at Air Studios in the 80s.
I was the GM manager.
I see. Wow.
And I was the.
That's a nice job.
Yeah, a very cool job. Great fun. Yeah. And then when the lease was up, we moved all 35 of us up to Lyndhurst in Hampstead. It's still going up there. Yeah. And we kind of got a bit carried away with that place. 27,000 square feet. And it's a magnificent studio and still going strong. It's world famous now, and rightly so. And they're a great team up there. And amazingly enough, there are still several people still working there that I hired in the 80s. So,
yeah. Why would you leave?
Why would you leave? Absolutely. Exactly. Funny enough, a lot of people have said that. It's kind of the place
if you're a true enthusiast, there isn't a better place to work.
Yeah, that's kind of how it panned out. So anyway, I ended up leaving in around about 1999, and started my own setup, a place called Sphere Studios in Battersea, which was like 3 studios, big setup. Ran that for a few years, and then I kind of went independent. Like a lot of us, when you hit your 50s, you suddenly realise you're unemployable. So you have to invent, your own career, if you like.
I resemble that remark.
Yeah. Sorry.
I resemble that remark.
You resemble that, Mark. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing for the last 20 years is like in reinventing myself constantly. So which means that every project you take on, everything you want to do, is scary, because there's always things you don't. There's things you don't know. So you're testing yourself the whole time.
Right.
And yes, it doesn't always work, but hopefully you get it to work enough.
Also scary, you've been working with Wes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he's.
I'm trying to get some dirt here, Malcolm. What have you worked on with Wes that's created scary moments, and how hard has he been pushing this gear?
Well,
I think that console was pretty scary.
Oh yeah. When I rang him up and said, "Wes, do you fancy being my assistant for a month?" and he kind of went, "Yeah, why not?" Without even really asking what it was. It was an old MCI console from Florida. These are American consoles. They weren't that well known over here in the UK, but I mean, they were very popular in the States. And I said, well, I've got this job to rebuild one. And it took us, 56 days flat out. We ripped just about every component out of this thing and rebuilt it.
Wow.
Yeah, there were some scary moments there. I mean, there were some blinding blue flashes and puffs of smoke and what have you. You know?
Blinding blue flashes. You know, as a guy who has to rebuild things and with the specialized nature of audio gear, isn't it a lot easier getting parts nowadays?
Funnily enough, yes and no. In that we're in a wonderful era, if you like, retro engineering, and there's some wonderful examples out there. One I cited a few years ago was Pulse Techniques.
Okay.
Go and look at that. Is it EQP31A? I can't remember.
EQP1A.
Right. You go and look at that thing. And, you know, when I saw it at an AES a few years ago, and I just went, this is extraordinary. It is not it's a clone of the original. And when I said to the guy, how were you able to do this? You know, because things like the iron that you get in the Transformers and what have you isn't available anymore. And I said, how do you deal with things like that? And he said, I took it into the Stanford University, the Nuclear Resonance Laboratory. And I kind of look at it and think, okay, you really have done your homework here.
No kidding.
Fine, no kidding. Okay, I accept it. And it's as good, if not better, than the original. You know, and there are numerous examples out there of, like, you know, the you know, Teletronics and what have you. Even Simon Hayward's example of the Fairchild compressor. Saywood, yeah. I beg your pardon, Saywood. His example of the Fairchild compressor, which is a wonderful recreation of it. In fact, he saved that whole compressor market because the world was just about to run out of the valves. Wow. Without the valves, I mean, you're talking, they're all gone. And he toddled off to Eastern Europe somewhere and found a manufacturer and finally persuaded them to start making these valves again. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So there, you know, just about every Fairchild owner worldwide is, you know, singing his praises for that fact alone. You know?
So upside of not just the world, you know, the worldwide economy. And the accessibility of parts like that. So that's a great upside.
It is indeed. And you know, the funny thing is about that kind of gear, and it brought it home to me the other day. I was selling some hi-fi stuff on eBay for a dear friend, and this guy turned up, and he was a true hi-fi buff, right? And he talked part numbers, and he talked, you know, and I had no idea what he was on about. I mean, he's talking about equipment I've never heard of, you know, and it's got this XYZ distortion and this characteristic. And I said to him, well, that's actually the difference between you and me, is that I said, I like distortion, you know, we see it as a tool, you know, and if it makes a noise that nothing else is making, we want it.
We want it,
know? Yeah, we want it. You guys just want to throw it in the bin, you know.
Yeah.
But
in the right hands.
Except for that time when you tried to improve a Fairchild.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You want me to tell that story?
Yes.
You might have heard of Jeff Emmerich. He was the Beatles engineer. I worked with him on many a project, and there was something wrong with he had his own Fairchilds. This is way back in the 80s out of Montserrat. And so I took it in. He said, it's not sounding right now. He couldn't tell me what it was, but he said, it doesn't sound right. So I went in there and cleaned it all up and what have you. And while I was there, I looked at it and thought, oh, I'll put a new bridge rectifier in it. I don't know whether I might be losing you here, but whatever. Valve Gear has a very weird looking power supply system, and I converted it from a valve power system to a transistor style power system. Took it back into the control room. Within milliseconds, he's screaming at me, what have you done to my compressor? I thought I'd improved it. What I'd done actually, it was no longer a compressor. It was now just like a flat amplifier, because the way that compressor works is by the power rail bumping up and down.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a bit techie, I know, but
Yeah, that's way inside.
Golden Ears spotted it immediately.
Okay, and then
Jeff Emerick.
Golden Ears, indeed. And he spotted it immediately. And how quickly did it take you to? How long did it take you to fix the problem?
About 5 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
just ripped out
Well, there you
ripped out
go.
the bridge rectifier and put the valve back in. There you go. Sorry about that. But
Was there something that you did that affected a recording that the world knows now, and you know that it would never have happened that way had you not fixed whatever it was you fixed?
I do know of
Ooh.
one actually, and it happened in my first couple of years at Air. It's a Roxy
Okay.
Music. It's a Roxy Music track.
Which one?
And I can't remember what. I can't. It's one of their singles. I can't think of the name of it at the minute. But there's some feedback at the beginning of it. Do you know the one I mean, Wes?
No, but I'm Googling.
Okay.
It's because every morning at Air we used to line up the tape machines, and we had to switch the Dolbys in and out, right, in order to line the tape machine up. And I'd forgotten to switch them back in, so the tape machine was on feedback. So the output was linked to the input. So when they hit record to actually take the master, the whole thing just went in.
The whole thing fed.
And a whole thing fed back until someone dived at the switch and just hit it, and they took the master, and they just liked this
And kept
feedback noise at the beginning.
Yep. See, if it sounds different, we want it.
So it's there. That's yeah. It was an
Terrific.
accident, really. I mean, it was not intended. But those are the kind of things, happy accidents that happened in the 70s. You know, when we were
can you
awake
mention
enough
it?
to realise.
Can you mention an artist or an artist-producer combination that we all should love even more than we do? Is there somebody who you would single out to say, you know what, everybody doesn't really know how beautiful a human being this person is?
I'll tell you one guy, actually, that you might not have heard of.
Is it Wes?
And
We'll start with
no,
Wes.
it's not.
No, it's not Wes. It's not Wes.
Apart from Wes, no.
Oh,
and
okay.
he had a big impact on me even before I went to Air. And I had afternoon tea with him this last weekend.
All right.
We finally tracked each other down. Yeah, his name's Steve Nye. And you probably might have come across him, but he was the engineer on Quantum Jump. He's about the same age as me.
Okay.
He's retired now, but he did lots of albums. He did lots of Roxy Music albums. He did Japan Drum. He did a lot of Murray Head albums, and then he went off to the States to do Robbie Robertson.
All right.
And we kind of lost contact with each other for 20 plus years. And we kind of met up last weekend at the Maltings at Snape, if you've ever heard of that place. Another story, but there we go. The Maltings is Benjamin Britten's concert hall. It's in East Anglia here, and it's an amazing concert hall. It was built in the 50s. And anyway, we ended up there, and we just reconnected, and we just spent the whole afternoon talking stories. But Steve is another one of those guys that just has an amazing pair of ears.
Yeah.
That and that's one that Wes does as well. They hear things that us mere mortals don't hear, but they know what to do about it, and they know the difference between it sounding good and sounding bad.
The emotion that it brings out of us. Yeah.
Yes, before the rest of us even realise what's going on, you know. And I kind of described. There were two types of engineers out there. There were the guys that kind of mixed it by numbers. Do you know what I mean? They were technically brilliant. You know, they knew how every widget worked on every box and all the rest of it. But they weren't musicians, so there was no empathy with what they were doing.
Yeah.
But a film score in there or what have you probably doesn't need that. They need to be able to handle, 500 pieces of information per second and deal with it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other type of engineer is people like Wes. He is a musician first, so he comes to all his craft from the fact that he loves music.
Yeah,
and he
with
can
a
play
sensitivity
music,
for music.
so he understands when a performance is good and when a performance can be improved.
Mm.
You know, and has the guts to be able to turn around to someone and say, "That's crap. Do it again."
Yeah.
And that's scary.
One thing that stands out about that whole list of credits that you rolled past for Steve Nye, the Japan Tin Drum album. That was the first time I ever looked at liner notes and saw among the credits somebody who was in charge of playing tapes. They had drums, keys, guitars, tapes. And
who was credited with tapes?
You know, I'll have to look at that now. I'm Googling.
No, because that was being done at Air Studios. So I mean,
Okay.
I know. Yeah, I know all the protagonists on this. But it's not
I see. Got track listing, personnel. Where was that? Richard Barbieri.
Richard Barbieri. Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
You've got David Sylvian, Mick Karn, Steve Jansen, of course, and then Richard Barbieri did keyboards.
He was one of the he was one of the band. Yeah, he wasn't. He wasn't. I was just thinking it might have been an air engineer or the assistant or something.
Oh, I see.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I looked at that, and I thought somebody was playing tapes.
Well,
and then you have to be curious about what were they doing with them. You know, how much splicing was happening? Were they twisting them backwards and playing them the other direction? You know, who knows? But it just makes you curious.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly. I mean, we used to call assistants in those days tape ops, tape operators. That's why I thought you were mentioning it. Really,
talking about an assistant engineer.
Yeah, an assistant engineer. Yeah, but I mean, the other thing you said about twisting things around, you know. Certainly, I mean, that used to infuriate most manufacturers of audio equipment because they'd bring us stuff to play with.
Yeah.
And the first thing I wouldn't say we tried to break it, but the first thing you try to do is, A, you don't read the manual, and B, you start twiddling all the knobs to see what kind of noises it makes.
What's a manual?
Yeah. Exactly, right. Well, yeah, that's when, you know, in the fault books, and we write RTFM, you know what that means, yes.
Read the fucking manual.
Right.
Read the yeah, exactly. Yeah, because, I mean, it was always that way, you know. I mean, but the truth was...
I mean, come on, though. You hand a bunch of engineers a piece of gear and you ask them to, you know, put it through its paces, and you don't think it's going to get hit with things and taken apart and twisted around and come back wired backwards in a lot of ways. It's I said, if they don't break it, they're not trying hard enough.
I mean, that used to be quite the way we used to buy equipment at Air in the late 80s when I was the manager was like, because bear in mind that, I mean, there are manufacturers throwing stuff through our door every other day at that time, right? I mean, it was a period of intense innovation. And I had bosses that were like reticent about buying new equipment. So what I used to do, I mean, they're no longer with us, so I can tell you how I did it now. I just put it out there and just left it in what we used to call the toy cupboard. Now, if in 3 months' time the manufacturer comes back and says, I better have that back, and I go into the toy cupboard and say, I'm sorry, mate, it's still sitting there, nobody's played with it, and give it back to them. If, on the other hand, they loved it, it was completely battered by that time. It had been on so many sessions, it had had grease pencil all over it, you know, it had a corner dented and all the rest of it. There's no way you could give it back to him in that state.
Yeah.
So we had to buy it.
Well, I also want to, just for our listeners who might not know exactly where Montserrat is, it's in the West Indies and it's a remote island. So just getting big pieces of gear there is an ordeal. So if you're talking about putting up, a situation where manufacturers are throwing gear at you, you almost have to create that situation just to conveniently get any damn thing to play with. And then since you've created that situation, now that things are coming, well, hey, we don't know when this is going to come around again. We want to keep it.
I'm talking about London here, not more.
Oh, okay. Well, London's a little easier to get gear. Yeah.
Yeah. No. The gear in the West Indies. Yes, you're absolutely right. That was a logistics nightmare.
Wow.
For the 10 years we were running it.
Yeah.
It got truly crazy at times as to like how do you keep this thing going?
And then you get people like the Police in there shooting videos where they're dancing on top of the console.
Oh, they're famous for that. Yep. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure somebody got kicked in the balls for that.
I kicked them. Yeah.
Okay, good.
How dare you dance on my console? Yeah.
Yeah. Really. So if we're looking at those, oh no, please go ahead.
I was going to say there is you talk about Montserrat. There is a documentary coming out in a few weeks' time.
Oh.
Which we were all involved with. It's coming at Universal Pictures, and it's called Under the Volcano. And it is the story of the 10 years of us lot in Montserrat.
Yeah.
And included in that is the whole thing of them dancing on the console. Yeah. And I think it cuts to me sort of going, how displeased I was. But there we go. We'll see. I haven't seen the finished cut yet, so I have no idea what is actually in it. But from all accounts, it is a wonderful story, and it's already got some great reviews. It's certainly got great reviews from the Martin family.
Yeah, that's good.
So, but
it's a wonderful place.
It is a wonderful. It's very special to all of us who's ever been there, because not only is it this thing a story about the studio, but it's a story about the island as well.
Mm-hmm. You can't exclude the story of the island from the story of the studio.
Well, I mean, it was the perfect Greek tragedy, really. In the end, it got smacked by the hurricane, and then the volcano took out 2/3 of it.
Yeah,
and yet the studio is still there physically.
Yeah.
I heard that there was an attempt to auction off whatever was left of it at the end of last year. Did you hear that?
No, it's not true. I was there last year. We were videoing it last year. No. The real story is that it's been in exclusion zone for the last 10 years. Ever since it happened. So
wow. So nothing can happen to it because it's in the exclusion zone.
Nope.
I think Malcolm's frozen. Yeah.
All right. Frozen.
Good. Let's talk about it. So
it was in the exclusion zone. I can tell you about that because I've been there. I mean it's
so is that what that means, that because it's in the exclusion zone nothing can happen to it?
So half the island got hit by the volcano. So they came up with the exclusion zone where you weren't allowed to go because you could still fall through the cracks and end up in boiling hot lava.
Yeah.
But I think
there are probably listeners that we should recap for that. Air Studios Montserrat was a powerhouse of a place. I mean, we're talking about Ghost in the Machine was recorded there, Synchronicity, Brothers in Arms, Dire Straits recorded there. I mean, so many huge recordings happened in this place that it was, it was one of the greatest studios in the world. And then tragedy struck. There was a hurricane, there was a volcano, and now that place, which was, not only was it a studio that was state of the art, but it was also sort of a place where artists could go and make these beautiful records because they could be free of the distractions of recording someplace like New York or Los Angeles or London. They would be in environments where they could essentially separate themselves from the world and concentrate and to some degree take it easy. I mean, we had Stuart Copeland on the show, and he recounted the story of when they recorded Synchronicity, and when he and Andy were ready to take off, Sting said, "You know what? I'm going to stick around for another week or two and just hang out. I'm enjoying myself here, and I'm just going to spend some leisure time." And so they loaded out, and who loaded in right after them was Dire Straits. So that's how Sting ended up on that record. The "I Want My MTV" vocal line, and that's how he ended up. At the time, the drummer for Dire Straits had done something. He sprained something, so they needed to bring somebody in to do the tracks, and they brought in Omar Hakim. and Omar Hakim met Sting on those sessions. And when Sting left the Police after Synchronicity and recorded his first solo album, Dream of the Blue Turtles, he hired Omar Hakim. So
wow.
There are a million stories like that came out of Air Studios because that was a place where artists could go.
You know more about this than I do. I didn't know that. I didn't know those stories. Yeah.
Oh, John loves his music.
I do.
Absolutely.
I love Wes too. Let's talk about Wes some more because I want to talk about the things that he breaks and what a strain he puts on you in your life, Malcolm. Because I know that you're being kind when you say things about Wes that don't include that bastard. He's always breaking some damn thing. He's always pushing this gear to the limits.
He's very good. He's very good. No, he's very even-tempered. And no, I'm sorry. There is no dirt really.
I even clean his workshop.
Oh, yeah, that was funny. Actually, he came round and started organising my workshop for me. You know what, Wes? I have actually picked up on a couple of the things that you did for me there.
I noticed.
He made me a tool tidy. Right,
I see.
Because he was just so fed up with all the tools scattered everywhere.
Organized them for you. Now you're all set up.
Yeah, no. So I've now got all in neat rows now. But that's probably too much time with lockdown, really.
Well, yeah, there's that also. What have you seen in this lockdown that's created? I like to look at adversities and think, what's going on here that I'm not seeing yet? That's going to end up being a benefit to me. And is there anything that you're seeing that's going to end up being a benefit to the industry because we've had to lock down the way we have?
Yes, and I think I don't think the full realization of it is happening. I'm working on a project at the moment that I can't really talk about with you guys at the moment, but it's certainly looking at the new ways that people interact with each other, and it's very interesting because it's, as you say, we are as an industry we've kind of got used to working on our own anyway. Look at Wes in his shed. Look at me in my shed. We had become a cottage industry anyway. Yeah. In those kind of ways, but I think lockdown has really sort of emphasized that now. So I think in some ways our industry was in some ways better prepared than some others.
Wow.
We were already into remote recording and what have you, and exchanging tapes and files and what have you. And certainly,
I hadn't really thought about it that way.
So certainly Wes in his garden shed there, and me in my shed. I mean, I know of dozens of people around London that work in similar ways. And it is what is quite sad is really that the opportunities for to come together as musicians, and I've always thought that was like the real fun in our industry is when you see a band in together and the sum is more than the total, however Confucius said it.
Yeah.
But it's and
that's still that's still the case.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to Simon the other day, and I don't know if you saw that Hans Zimmer thing on the telly last night with David Attenborough, and it was filmed at Lyndhurst.
Right.
But there you can see an orchestra that has been socially distanced, right? Right, for recording.
Wow.
And I kind of looked at that and thought, oh, here's the new reality, because. What does an orchestra sound like when all these violin players are all pushed 2 meters apart? You need a lot more space to do it, but the sound will be different because players, string players are used to being close to each other and tuning as a block, if you know what I mean.
Tuning as one.
Yeah.
Tuning into, like, in terms of the way they listen to each other, tuning into nuance.
Yes, absolutely. And
if they're losing that, there's going to be something lost, but might there be something gained as well?
Well, interesting. I mean, Simon did say to me that there was an intense debate going on about the engineers thought it was brilliant, but the musicians themselves weren't quite so sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little easier to isolate things.
It is, and that's what engineers love. You see, because they have more control.
Not so much, Wes says.
Not for strings. Not for strings. I mean,
Yeah, strings you want to record as a body.
Yeah, I mean it's one animal really. I mean, I remember the first time I was accidentally pushed into recording 10 string players in Studio 2 at Rack, which is tiny.
Yeah.
I was like, how am I going to get 10 people in there without them poking each other's eye out?
Yeah. Yeah.
You just make sure you got no lefties.
Yeah. But we managed to get them in, and I just put 3 mics up. I put a Decca-tree in a room where a Decca-tree does not belong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But it was instant. It was that Phil Spector thing. It was like all the energy just concentrated into one block, and it's the best string sound I've ever recorded. In a wrong room with the wrong mic technique, with people way too close to each other. It was amazing.
You remind me of the Glyn Johns. I can't say it properly. The drum mic thing.
Yep.
You know, which is, you know, I mean, I used to
3 mics.
kind of
let them bleed.
Well, no, sometimes you'd see engineers, come in and they'd like wrap 20 mics around a drum kit.
Yeah.
And they've got this huge phasing problem going on.
Oh yeah.
You know. All right, is that you? Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Glyn John's technique was only 2 mics over the top and 1 at the front. But I do.
At the front. Where at the front? Not jammed into the kick, but just in front.
One by the kick. One overhead, above the kick, looking down at the snare, 4 feet above.
Okay.
And then if you take the 4 foot sideways to the floor tom, the same mic basically looking over the floor tom towards the snare. That's it.
Wow.
Completely face coherent.
Okay.
That's the Led Zeppelin drum sound.
Yeah. I got to tell you a funny little story.
And then recorded at the landing at the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I'm
going to try it.
I can tell you a funny story about that. When it was one of the first times that Glyn ever used air, and he came in, and I was hovering around like at the back of the control wall, got a big star in there, like better make sure everything's all right, like just making sure and what have you. And they went out there and they did. I can't remember who the band was. Maybe for the better for this. And they all played and whatever. And they came back in for the first playback, and they're playing the thing back. And the drummer said to Glyn, right next to me, "Glyn, I don't think much of the drum sound." To which Glyn replied, "There's nothing wrong with the drum sound. When you start playing it properly, it'll sound great."
Oh.
And it was like, and at which point I'm thinking, I think I'm going to slip out of this control room because this might be a short session.
I know what band that is.
You know which band that was?
It's been told to me by the band.
Oh, okay. Does that mean they okayed you sharing it?
No.
No. All right. We'll stay away from that.
They also did the same when they did vocal takes, and they came back in and they said, "What? Sounds a bit shit, doesn't it?" And he went, "That's what you sound like." And they said, "Oh, it could definitely sound better. I don't think I agree with what you're doing." And he just said to the singer, "Come with me." And they were recording it at his place, I think. And he just walked him down the corridor, which is lined with gold records. He just went, "What do you see?" "Your gold records, Glyn." "Okay, now shut up."
The punchline to that joke is, "Now shut up."
Okay.
I'll start singing it properly.
Yeah.
Right. You would think that they overheard the conversation with the drummer and then stopped talking.
Well, yeah.
But that's okay. To each his own. Speaking of those kinds of experiences, because you've been, especially in your role as GM at Air Studios Montserrat, what did you see there that really gave you a sense that the music industry is a force for good?
For good?
Yeah.
Whew.
I mean, you had to see some things there that made you go, you know what? I'm right where I need to be. Or for shitty, go ahead and go there too. But if that's where you're,
all right, well,
because it seems like I stumped you when I said, why are we?
No, there are a few. Don't worry. I'll tell you one that actually, it was one of the best moments of my career, and it happened in Montserrat. Have we lost our presenter here, Wes?
We have lost our presenter, but we're still live.
Well, we'll carry on then. Right, all right. You can present, and I'll talk then.
Should we pull out drummer jokes now?
Yeah, now's a good time for that.
Oh, there he is.
How many drummers does it take to bail out a StreamYard? Anyway, evidently just one.
No, this was just like life does not get better than this. And I was only 26, and we were in Montserrat. We were recording McCartney, and it's 3 weeks after Lennon died, and he invited Stevie Wonder down. That's when they did Ebony and Ivory, and they had just finished recording it in the studio, and we'd all been sitting around waiting for them to come out so we could all have dinner. We had dinner, and Stevie turned around to me and he said, "Malk," he said, "Can you bring my piano up onto the balcony?" Okay. So I bring up his Fender Rhodes. We put it on there. He gave us 10 of us sitting around there, which was McCartney and his family, the tech, the engineer, and a couple of the waiters and what have you. There was only about 10 of us. He played for 2.5 hours as the sun's going down over the Caribbean, and he played all his big hits. But they were all completely different the way he used to do it, you know. And I was just sitting there in just agog. Really?
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like it because it was such a personal thing, you know. And McCartney was joining in on some of the cool.
Yep. Yeah. We're having some StreamYard issues, but anyway, that's a magnificent story. Yeah, whatever. It happens. It's technology. But this is great. The two things about that story that I just want to highlight. First of all, Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder are in the booth. They're recording Ebony and Ivory. And the rest of the team is just like, I was recapping your story, Malcolm. I was recapping what was amusing about your story. And the first thing I found amusing was you have Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder in a room. And the rest of you are outside going, I wish these guys would hurry up so we can go to dinner.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is like that, really, isn't it? You know, I mean,
sure, everybody's hungry. But anyway, and then the second thing is, here's Stevie Wonder, and he takes the opportunity, as Stevie Wonder would, now that we have had the benefit of Stevie Wonder for 50 some odd years in our lives. He takes the opportunity to spread the joy by having you bring his Fender Rhodes up onto the balcony so that he can emote for you for a couple hours.
Yeah.
That's magnificent.
It's extraordinary. I mean, exactly. I mean, the music just poured out of that man.
Amazing.
And that's and it was like that the whole time. Do you know the next night he went down to the nightclub in the town on a Monday night. He went into this club, and the house band was there. It was some American guys playing, and there must have been only about half a dozen people in the nightclub. And what does he do? He gets up on stage and starts playing with them. Right? Yeah. And there's only half a dozen of us in the nightclub. I tell you, within half an hour, there was 400 people in that nightclub.
Terrific! In there to see Chip and the Dipshits because with their special guest Stevie Wonder.
Exactly.
The Agouti brothers.
The Agouti brothers.
The Agouti brothers. Yeah, I mean, it's the stuff of legend. I have a tape recording of it somewhere, a cassette recording of it. I think I'm
looking at the file right now.
Oh, I see.
Oh, yeah. You've got a copy. Did I give you a
Wes
copy?
Got all the secrets.
I've got a copy.
Well, I don't know, but some of it might end up in this movie I've just been talking about. So we'll see.
Yeah, that would be cool to see that because other magic moments that happened to Air Studios just had
Yeah.
to. I mean, you're talking about just 2 days in the 10 years that Air Studios existed, and those 2 days had churned out those stories. What else are we missing out on that we should know about that came out of there?
I'm not sure it's a magical moment, but this is one of my all-time favorites. Sorry, Malcolm, to make you tell it again, but Around the Edge of Oxford Circus.
Oh, the Sex Pistols. Oh,
yes.
Okay, we did the Sex Pistols.
I'm gonna have a smoke.
Sorry, this is.
Here we go. Wind up.
Yeah, okay. We did the Sex Pistols, and we were also doing a band called the Ozark Mounted Daredevils.
Oh yes.
Do you remember them?
Right. Oh yeah.
Now, can you imagine 2 bands at opposite ends of the musical spectrum in the same studio, in the same setup? Right. The Pistols were in Studio 2, and the Ozarks were in Studio 1. If you've ever seen Oxford Circus, it's about 150 foot right above Oxford Circus in London. Sid Vicious took to arriving by bicycle. He used to ride up in the lift, and he rode into reception, and he saw one of the Ozarks asleep on the sofa in reception. The guy had a long beard like the... and he kind of looked around and just went up to this guy, yanked him on his beard and went, "Watcha, mate?" Cycled off in his bike, down to Studio 2. Anyway, later that day, I only heard this years later from, is it John, the guy who, the lead guy in the Ozarks? He said, "Do you know what?" He said, "We heard a tapping on the window in Studio 1, and we looked out, and there's Sid Vicious on his bicycle. He's cycled around the parapet of the building. It's about 3 foot wide, 150 foot off the ground, no fences.
Wow.
And it must have been about a 40, 50 meter bike ride and 2 sharp corners.
Mm.
And Sid had cycled all the way round on his bike to bang on the window to wind them up." and that's like,
that's going a long way for a joke.
And that's like, he could have been dead any second if he'd gone off that parapet.
Yeah, there's no surviving that. Just hearing that story gave me a feeling in my undercarriage.
Yeah.
Horrible. Well, it took Sid Vicious another 18 months, but sadly, he was a troubled soul. And I don't think it had much to do with the business, but there you go.
Yeah. But he would go a long way for a gag, and I appreciate anybody who would do that.
Oh, I mean, the gags that used to happen there was silliness happened every day at Air in those kind of ways. I was talking to Steve over the weekend. We were just reminiscing that when we both started there, George Martin was good friends with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan.
That's right. He had gotten his start recording comedy albums, didn't he?
He did. Right.
Yeah.
So what happened when I got there? Peter Sellers' son, Mike Sellers, was one of the tape ops, and Sean Milligan, who was Spike Milligan's son, was one of the tape ops.
Okay.
So you can imagine the kind of nonsense that went on a daily basis. It was just practical jokes going on anywhere the whole time. And it was just a goon show. Don't get me started on those two, because they were like... But, I mean, it was just hilarious fun for like 2 or 3 years, because in the 70s, there wasn't such a thing as a budget. There was a need to make music. And, the cold wind of the accountants getting a grip on it only really started at the beginning of the 80s. But in the 70s, it was just a free-for-all.
Right.
That was an amazing time to be in the studio business. That was the only real heyday of the studio business because of those types of record industry budgets. They would just pour money on recordings. There were gatekeepers, and once you got through the gates and you got a real record deal and you got the trust of a record label, they threw gobs of money at you to get a recording down, and you could go to a place like Montserrat, which was the perfect excuse to say, hey, I need to go isolate myself. I will need to go make a record in a state-of-the-art facility. And by the way, right outside the state-of-the-art facility, they have a beautiful pool, and it's an island in the West Indies. So
you wouldn't get away with it now, would you?
Yeah, no, you couldn't do that now. Now they're saying, okay, well, we expect 3 albums out of you, and we've heard what you recorded in your bedroom, so stay there.
Yeah.
So like you said, we are kind of poised for this type of environment now that we're all on lockdown. There was nobody more prepared than the recording industry.
I was one of the examples I used of that era was U2, who I think, am I right? You probably know this better than I do. It was their fourth album that really hit the big time. The first three were relative flops. Now, you know, a record company would not do that now. I mean, if your first album was a flop, you're gone.
Yeah, they're moving on.
You're done. They're moving on. Absolutely. To stay with a band through to a fourth album is quite extraordinary. I mean, they obviously, had a lot of faith in it, and they were right. But that simply wouldn't happen these days, which is sad, really. And you don't really know whether the music business of that era, although it was rife with, shall we say, corruption on many levels. Of artists getting ripped off. Certainly what they created for artists in most instances was this kind of bubble, this creative bubble for them, where they could just do what they wanted.
Yeah.
And that was the good side of it, Whereas now, your average artist not only has to be a good musician, they have to be good at selling themselves, they have to be good at accountancy and everything else.
Yeah,
which is
true.
Which is quite sad, really.
Well, it's certainly excluding some real true artists from being able to make records that get to us, because the thing about those first three albums from U2, which I believe began right at 1979, 1980, Pete would know because he's the consummate U2 expert,
right?
And he's not on the show right now, but the thing about them is those records recovered after that fourth album was big, and then the fourth album was I don't remember now. The fifth album was the Joshua Tree.
Right.
But after those fourth and fifth albums really sort of launched into the stratosphere, then the first three caught up because everybody who came to them in that fourth album said, well, what did they do before?
Yeah.
So eventually the record labels did make that money back.
Sure.
And, the vision came true. But now nobody's got the time for that. It's really unfortunate.
It is the times we live in. I mean, I remember a few years ago, a couple of kids said to me, well, how do I do it? The Japanese were always asking me, like, how do we get into the big time? I said, well, the first thing with Japanese is stop copying us, dream up something for yourself,
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other one-liner to it.
They're not great at that.
No, they're not. No.
Turns out the Koreans, though.
Yeah, the Koreans are better at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing is you've got to create this cult of self now.
Yeah.
And you do it with your Facebook and your Twitter accounts and everything else, and you have to do it on your own, which I think is sad in a way.
Tough. It's tough at work. I mean, at best, it's tough. At worst, it's taking a guy who could give us some amazing music. I mean, if you look back at guys like Bill Withers, for instance, he was not great at selling himself. He was not great at the business stuff. He was not great at but he could, you want to talk about three chords and the truth. And, he was the guy who could deliver that. And now generations later, we're still appreciating his stuff. That would never have flown today.
No.
Yeah. Well, and do you know what, John? Certainly I found a lot of musicians that I kind of had to deal with, on a professional level. And interestingly, in studios, I mean, we did get to see them in the raw, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
In a way that nobody else saw. And a lot of them are damaged people. They were not able to have the kind of conversations that you and I are having now. They've done their 10,000 hours of solitude, and they discovered how to communicate through music.
Yeah.
In ways that we can't, because we can communicate like this.
Because we're communicating like this, absolutely, which is what normal people do, if you like. No, I'm not saying we're normal, but but time and again, I mean, and you watch a musician just go out there and start playing an instrument and singing or whatever, and it's just like, wow, how do they do that? They do it because they've been doing it for 10,000 hours, whatever that story is, you know.
Yeah, right.
Extraordinary. I mean, we've probably all tried to play our instruments and thought, how on earth do I get good at it? You get good at it by doing nothing else.
I love playing the drums, and I am not at all that guy who had to sequester himself, because I'm not. I mean, you know, I'm pretty well adjusted, and socially I get along with people, and I love to spend time with people, and that robs me of my ability to be a really good drummer.
Well, there you go. There you go. You've confessed. There you go.
And I also want to say, I found myself at one point. I had my Uncle Andy worked for Northwest, I think it was, and I found myself with him on a flight from Tokyo to Guam, and we were upstairs in a 747 in that little bubble, and so we were in the first class only cabin, and I looked across the aisle from me, and there was a Japanese guy who was clearly a rock star. This guy was decked out. He looked like if Prince was Japanese.
Gotcha.
Full on Purple Rain Prince with the, you know, ruffles, and you look at this guy, it looks like, honestly, it looked like he's wearing a Halloween costume. And he was sitting with his manager, who was an American woman, and they were talking about the next places on his schedule or whatever. So clearly he was a Japanese rock star, but you know, I couldn't say he had his own look. I couldn't say any of those things. I bet he was a talented musician. I bet he could rip on whatever his axe was. But you know, he was clearly stealing somebody else's shtick. So I just wanted to say that because of your story about telling Japanese people to get that.
Yeah. I mean, like, sadly, we used to get a lot of Japanese bands through air because of George Martin. You know, you know, it was like, we were revered. We never marketed in Japan, but I mean, they were turning up on a constant stream.
Sure.
But I do remember one of them coming to me once and saying, can you find us a saxophone player on, and it was like at 4:00 in the afternoon in some date, like 21 days time. And I said, well, sure. Yes. I mean, I can put you. I said, are you sure of the date and time? He said, oh, yes. He said, yes.
Yeah.
It is in our schedule. It is in our schedule.
I'm sure with Japanese precision.
And I kind of saw this schedule and I thought, they worked out the whole album in like 3-hour slots.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, so there was no room for any.
There was no way it was going to be good.
There was no way for like just letting something happen organically. No.
Yeah.
Which is quite unfortunate, really. But there we have it.
Yeah. We've robbed you of an hour of your life, and I will say, first of all, thank you so much. We're grateful that you would share these stories with us. Wes, thank you as well. I see why you love this guy so much. And my last question is, will you come back on and do it again?
Sure, if you'll have me. If you think I've got a few more war stories that are of interest.
Excellent. We will mind them of you.
Okay.
Our guest today was Malcolm Atkin. Everybody, you know what? Go listen to your favorite recordings that came out of Air Studios in Montserrat, and go listen to your favorite George Martin recordings, because there are some good ones too. That ought to keep you busy for a while. And the next time we have Malcolm on, shoot us some questions and we'll ask him to dig up dirt and the dirty details. Thank you so much for being on, fellas. Thank you, Wes.
Pleasure.
All right,
cool,
bye
man.
for now.
Take it easy.
See you guys
later.
Bye.
Here we go.
It says we're still live here.
It does.
We can't talk about him yet. He's still live, you see. He's left it switched on. Yeah, well, sneaky. All right, mate.
Off we go.
All right, catch you later.
Later.
Bye.